generated by the engine is just a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen. It's water vapor. And in about an hour's time, someone in Mississippi is going to get wet washing. It will actually rain. I told you. It's raining. That's unbelievable. NASA's playing God. It's making its own weather.
The Strategic Defense Initiative. The Star Wars program routinely falsified research data according to military sources at the time. Quote, "We would lose hundreds of millions of dollars in Congress if we did not perform our tests successfully. We put a beacon with a certain frequency on the target vehicle. On the interceptor, we had a receiver. The hit looked beautiful, so Congress did not ask questions." The very idea of Star Wars, an umbrella that would shield America from Soviet nuclear warheads, was itself a massive deception. No knowledgeable scientist thought for a minute such a shield was feasible, yet the Pentagon proceeded with this fraud and faked other tests in 1990 and 1991 after the Soviet threat had disappeared. Edward Teller was charged with falsifying test data on Super Excalibur, a nuclear-powered X-ray laser built by Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. The project was canceled in 1992. All the talk about death rays and charged particle beams was little more than an elaborate smokescreen designed to hide the fact that the U.S. was developing a directed energy weapon that uses a high-power microwave pulse. Livermore Labs has been a central participant in SDI since 1982, when Edward Teller, the lab's founder, suggested SDI to Reagan. The father of the H-bomb received 40,000 shares of a laser research company that later defrauded its investors. Dr. Teller tried to sell Alaska on Project Plowshare, the use of 6 thermonuclear weapons to excavate a harbor at Cape Thompson, Alaska. In 1987, Teller returned to Alaska to propose the installation of a laser-like weapon system on the north slope of Alaska. The weapon system Teller was trying to sell was classified and not openly discussed, but the presentations indicated this Star Wars weapon was in fact HAARP. In 1995, Congress killed funding for Star Wars, but HAARP continues as the ultimate SDI radio frequency radiation weapon. The Reagan administration intensified the push into electromagnetic weapons development under Project Sleeping Beauty. A scientist working for the Army's Ballistic Defense Command complained to the House Government Operations Committee that as much as half of the entire SDI budget had disappeared into classified projects.
Suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe. We'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat.
Bitter heat in the summer, brutal cold in the winter, violent weather.
In 1983, I did radio tomography with 30 watts, looking for oil in the ground. I found 26 oil wells over a 9-state area, and 100% of the time was accurate, with just 30 watts of power beaming straight into solid rock. HAARP uses 1 billion watts. Beam straight into the ionosphere for experiments. Picture these strings on the piano as layers of the earth. Each one has its own frequency. What we used to do is beam radio waves into the ground, and it would vibrate any strings that were present in the ground. We might get a sound back like, and we'd say, that's natural gas. We might get a sound back like, We say that's crude oil. We were able to identify each frequency. We accomplished this with just 30 watts of radio power. If you do this with a billion watts, the vibrations are so violent that the entire piano would shake. In fact, the whole house would shake. In fact, the vibrations could be so severe underground that could even cause an earthquake.
The vibrations could be so severe underground that could even cause an earthquake. Last year, I confronted Heizo Takenaka, the former Japanese finance minister, over why he handed over control of the Japanese financial system to a group of American and European oligarchs. He and his envoy told me that it was because Japan had been threatened by an earthquake machine. I did not believe it at the time. However, when I started exposing some of their doings, I was told by the Japanese security police that because of what I had said on places like Rense.com, that Niigata City was going to be hit by an earthquake. 2 days later, Japan's largest nuclear reactor was the exact epicenter of 2 earthquakes, both 6.8 in magnitude. That was too much of a coincidence for me. So I started doing research and found out about HAARP, H-A-A-R-P. And I realized that they really did know how to make earthquakes. And they do it by shooting a billion-watt microwave into the ionosphere, which is the part of the atmosphere that has a lot of energy in it, that pushes the ionosphere up into outer space, and then it rebounds. And the way it rebounds can cause earthquakes. Just like an opera singer can break a glass by singing at a certain level, or by dragging your fingernails on a blackboard, you feel a weird sensation. If they adjust the vibration for the rock underneath their target site, they can do that. The same machine can also heat up subterranean water to cause earthquakes. And remember, a billion-watt microwave. What does microwave do to water? It heats it up. Now imagine if you put 1 billion watts into a tropical storm. You could make it much bigger, and you could change the direction it flows in. You know how there's high-pressure zones and low-pressure zones. Well, high is hot and low is cold, and the hot flows into the cold, and vice versa, and there's more of the cold. So they can heat up an area and cause it to flow into a next door area. In other words, these people are capable of creating the cyclone that hit Myanmar, the tsunami that hit Indonesia, and the earthquake that hit China. Now, after the earthquakes hit Niigata, a member of the Inagawa crime family, which is based around the U.S. Yokosuka Air Base, and members of the Inagawa family have told me that their big boss is George Bush Sr. In other words, they work for Skull and Bones. They have told me that their big boss is George Bush Sr. In other words, they work for Skull and Bones.
Cloud seeding is the most common type of weather modification, and it has many different techniques and applications. Today, it's mostly used to increase rain and snowfall, reduce the size of hail, and reduce fog at airports.
Traditionally, cloud seeding has been done from the air. So airplanes have had racks on them where these same flares are positioned on the airplane, and the airplane flies into the storm. So in order to reduce the cost to the client and reduce our carbon footprint, we've been able to station these on the ground. Now, we can do this in places where weather permits.
Behind a barbed wire fence designed to keep away curious cattle, the cloud seeding gear awaits the right kind of weather.
So these are referred to as AHOGs. That stands for Automated High Output Ground Seeding Systems. We've got 3 primary components of our equipment here. The first is the control module that you see behind me. Then we have our actual cloud seeding flares. The cameras for security. It also helps us observe weather conditions in real time and make sure that all of the equipment is operating correctly during a storm. Inside these canisters are the flares with the seeding agents. The canisters are used as spark arresters, so they prevent sparks from reaching the ground. So we pull off the spark arrestor, you can see the flare inside. So the ignition of the flares are controlled from the control module that's behind us. So the white triangle there is a cell service modem, and then the solar panel keeps us powered. Inside we have a battery and then a control board. So the control board interacts with the software. We're linked or synced with the software in Utah currently, and that allows us to fire or ignite any of the flares from that remote location.
Because of the lack of clouds and proper wind conditions, today is not a good day for cloud seeding at all. But Garrett and his team are going to light a flare for us anyway, so we can show you how it works. There's just one small problem. The battery in the control module died shortly before we arrived, but it's nothing a little jump start can't fix. After a little juice from Garrett's truck, it's time to set off the flare.
The primary seeding agent in this is silver iodide. Silver iodide is a simple compound. It's polar in nature like water, so there's chemical properties that help attract water molecules to silver iodide. It's also structured molecularly similar to ice, so it helps generate or helps spawn the generation of ice buildup, and then that becomes a hailstone or a snowflake that falls here primarily as rain. So one flare like this has billions and billions of potential sites for that water to congregate around. We'll launch them in sequences. We watch the radar to see when bands of the highest concentration of liquid water are passing above us in the clouds, and we try to target those high concentration pockets in the storm systems. We'll launch between 3 and 20 flares for a typical storm. Once the flare is lit, it takes a little bit of time to carry up into the clouds, and once it's up at the proper elevation, it'll take about 20 minutes to instigate the rain or the snow process. So overall, you're probably looking at about 40 to 45 minutes before you're seeing the maximum result. And that's why we're stationed miles away from our target area. So we have very specific targets that drain directly into major water basins, and we time these events to correlate with rain above those intended targets.
They invited me to a so-called UFO gathering where they showed me the video of this blob. They told me it was a UFO, but it was obviously, to me anyway, a plasma weapon or a ball of heat created by something like a billion-watt microwave. And I predicted in my blog that there would be videos of lights found above China before the earthquake, and those videos then appeared on the internet after I predicted they would. And furthermore, a Taiwanese satellite detected a 50% drop in the ionosphere, in the amount of electric energy in the ionosphere above the earthquake zone. Now, a 50% drop would be exactly what would happen with HAARP. It would push the ionosphere up, and then it would slam back down. So, it looks like the insane criminals who have taken over the U.S. government are killing people and threatening people with earthquake weapons. It doesn't look like it. I actually have some of the proof.
High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, HAARP. 30 miles from Fairbanks, Alaska, is the real focus of anti-missile defense that SDI was purported to be, and much more. The public patent was titled A Method and Apparatus for Altering a Region of the Earth's Atmosphere, Ionosphere, and Magnetosphere. Dr. Bernard Eastland, a physicist who holds a patent for the fusion torch, and also holds a dozen others related to HAARP that were eventually purchased by E-Systems and Raytheon. Patent number 4686605 claims the following uses: cause total disruption of all forms of communications over a very large portion of the Earth, missile or aircraft destruction, deflection, or confusion, weather modification, by altering solar absorption, also altering composition of the atmosphere. This patent was classified by the Navy under National Security Order in 1987, but other public patents exist for purposes of power beaming systems, artificial ionospheric mirror composed of a plasma layer, creation of artificial ionizing clouds above the Earth, defense system for discriminating between objects in space, nuclear-sized explosions without radiation. HAARP is described as a research instrument for studying the ionosphere, an ionospheric heater, or IRI, of which many exist, but HAARP is special. The ability to focus energy and the unprecedented amount in gigawatts, billions of watts, makes it literally millions of times more effective at heating the region about 120 miles above the Earth's surface. The atmosphere has most of its density below 30 miles altitude. The ionosphere is the very thin layer above that absorbs dangerous ultraviolet radiation and makes life possible on Earth. There is very little mixing normally between the two layers, but disturbances in the ionosphere translate to changes in weather, such as normally occurring sunspots and the solar wind. The main idea behind HAARP is the ability to direct electrons along the naturally occurring magnetic field lines of the Earth and accelerate them to near the speed of light to form a protective shell of highly excited particles that not only block communications worldwide, but destroy missiles in their trajectory as they descend from space. The effects can be localized by punching a hole through the ionosphere to superheat an area 30 kilometers in diameter into a plasma shield. Any missile or aircraft would be destroyed that tried to fly through the plasma, which is the fourth state of matter. A hole in the ionosphere above an enemy country could kill by allowing solar radiation to strike the surface unhindered. Weather modification could also be used as an instrument of warfare by manipulating the electric jet and the jet streams that dictate climate. The publicly stated aim is C3, Command, Communication, and Control. The margin of victory in war is to block or intercept enemy communications and to secure your own. The signals in the ELF extremely low frequency range can be generated by HAARP and heard anywhere in the world and are used for earth-penetrating tomography, basically finding enemy submarines and underground bases. Dr. Richard Williams says the high-energy experiments will generate the equivalent of the output of 10 to 100 large power-generating stations, and that, quote, tests of these kinds could cause irreversible damage. According to Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher, quote, the ionosphere is prone to catalytic reactions, so if a small part is changed, a major change in the ionosphere can happen. HAARP documents admit that 1,000-fold greater amounts of energy can be released in the ionosphere than injected. Stanford University experiments beaming radio waves into the magnetosphere detected the signals halfway around the world. Some were amplified 1,000 times.
We have with HAARP is sort of the universal hammer for geophysical warfare.
Nick Begich is the chief conspiracy theorist.
So when did you know that you were onto something?
I think as soon as I saw the references to Tesla's work, and when I read Bernard Eastland's original patents, I realized that what we really had here in Alaska was a prototype for a ground-based Star Wars weapon system.
HAARP is a non-classified project run not by Bernard Eastland, but by the U.S. Army and Navy. The official HAARP story is told by one man, John Heckscher.
It consists of several types of transmitting instruments and numerous scientific instruments that study the natural ionosphere and the ionosphere that has been perturbed by the instruments that we are building.
The ionosphere is a sea of electrically charged particles in the upper atmosphere, and the instrument is a powerful radio wave transmitter.
Does it have any military applications?
The site itself is strictly a scientific research site. Perhaps the outcome of some of the science, perhaps some of the results could be applied in a military system.
So this is the desert. I mean, they averaged 3 to 4 inches of rain a year, and they had a lot more than that in a matter of about 30 hours or so. You may have seen the video of the airport. In some cases, there was 4 or 5 feet of water on the roadways. Crazy, crazy, crazy. And take a look at this other video where a cat, this is why they say cats have 9 lives. I mean, this wins the internet. Waited until the police rescued him, and it was a success. So that is a great story out of this big flood. So I want to talk a little bit about how astonishing this flood was. There was 6 to 14 inches of rainfall in 4 48 hours. That's 2 to 3 years worth of rain in around 2 days.
So 14 inches of rainfall in 48 hours. That's 2 to 3 years worth of rain in around 2 days.
And it's about a once-in-a-thousand-year rain event in a historic climate. Why did it happen? Well, turns out a very dynamic weather pattern. Strong subtropical jet stream across Africa, 3 systems moving really slowly. That one in particular is the one that affected Dubai. So it really was in the perfect spot to generate all that heavy rainfall. And if you look closely enough at this satellite, watch as it goes one more time. They got hit by one big rainstorm, then another one, then another one, then another one. So it was training over the same location. A convective complex caused several rounds of rain over the same area. We see that sometimes in Florida, but not usually in the desert. Now, what's blowing up the internet right now is that question. Was it cloud seeding? Well, the UAE does have a cloud seeding program, but I can tell you cloud seeding can only slightly, a teeny bit, enhance rainfall. It can't cause a rain bomb like we saw across the desert.
Not to mention, cloud seeding is based on a natural phenomenon, condensation nuclei, and we had a ton of dust in this area. This is an aerial view of the dust that was moving over Dubai. And so this is Mother Nature's cloud seeding. It could have acted as a force for the water to gather around those and make for the bigger droplets of water as well.
Yeah, I mean, if in fact there was cloud seeding, it would have been completely overwhelmed by all of that natural cloud seeding. There was a ton of dust. And so, again, cloud seeding, it's possible that they did it, but it would have had a very minimal impact on that system. It was a natural system, likely enhanced by climate change. That is.
It smells really bad. It's like burning chemical smells. This thing is not dripping at all. It's just disappearing. Nothing. Oh, fuck, I can't hardly do that. It's... Okay. It's burning off some chemical. Yeah, it's like... Look at the flame, it gets bigger. Yeah, holy shit. It's burning some type of chemical.
Heat up the ionosphere for a few minutes, and then you shut it off, and you watch the ionosphere repair itself. It does that in a few seconds, and you do a lot of experiments that way, things you can't do in the laboratory.
First time I visited HAARP, I didn't even know what it was. I went to HAARP as part of a physics club, the Society of Physics Students. I was a student here at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and HAARP at the time held an annual open house event where the public could tour the facility and talk to the scientists.
HAARP is a facility to study the ionosphere region 60 miles out into space. And that's a region where there's not much density. The air is very thin. It's mostly plasma, which means electrons and ions.
When I saw this facility and saw how unique and interesting it was, so when I decided to do my PhD thesis research using the HAARP facility itself. HAARP stands for the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program.
The federal government spent about $300 million. It's the most exquisite of its kind in the world. It's currently owned and operated by the Air Force Research Lab. And they have other priorities. They've done some tests over the years. Now they want to go do other things. So it's become a bit of an orphan sitting down there in Kokona. The U.S. has the lead in the world in this area. I'd be ashamed to give that up. The other facilities aren't nearly as flexible or as powerful. And HAARP can do science that the other two can't. It's a chart that shows and compares all the heaters, including air receiver. You can see that it's quite a bit more powerful and more flexible.
It's an instrument that allows us to make small changes to the ionosphere, and then we can measure the response of the ionosphere and the upper atmosphere to the changes that HAARP is making. Scientists have categorized the various layers of the atmosphere. Most of the weather that we experience occurs in the troposphere. When we fly in commercial aircraft, we're generally flying at the top of the troposphere. Above that is the stratosphere, and above that is the mesosphere, and above that is the thermosphere. And the ionosphere is basically part of the thermosphere, which extends from about 80 to 100 kilometers altitude all the way up to about 1,000 kilometers altitude. And so the ionosphere is generally what we refer to as the partially ionized portion of the thermosphere. It's too high for weather balloons and it's too low for many satellites. And sure, we can launch rockets through the ionosphere too, as we do at Poker Flat, but those are very fast but expensive experiments. The reason why we care about the ionosphere, particularly for radio communication, is that radio waves, when traveling through free space, behave differently when they travel through a region of charged particles or plasma. The ionosphere is basically a partially ionized plasma, and so one of the things that can happen to radio waves that travel through a plasma is that they can be bent, their polarization can change, they can be absorbed, and since so much of our lives is really dependent on radio communication, either communicating to satellites or for navigation with GPS, which is also communicating with satellites essentially, or over-the-horizon communication or over-the-horizon radar, it's really important for us to understand how radio waves are affected by the ionosphere, and in some cases how radio waves affect the ionosphere in the case of HAARP or other powerful radio transmitters.
A lot of us realize how important it is, how powerful, how significant the facility is. So we're trying to figure out ways to keep it alive as an active scientific tool.
Why would it be beneficial? I can't speak for the applications, but it's a mystery to solve. You can think of the ionosphere as a natural plasma laboratory, the conditions of which are difficult to replicate in an actual physical laboratory. And so this is just another way of learning about the world around us.
Because if the Air Force shuts it down, by prior agreement, they're required to remediate it, which means they have to go back and turn the land back into the way it was before they started. They'll have to bulldoze the whole site away.
125,000 acres of nothing. They even had to move 5 cemeteries because the noise they were planning on making would wake the dead. Hear what I'm saying. I couldn't even hear myself. As it turns out, the cleanest. Now, the most amazing thing is that cloud up there, which was generated by the engine, is just a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen. It's water vapor. And in about an hour's time, someone in Mississippi is going to get wet washing. It will actually rain. I told you. It's raining. That's unbelievable. What? NASA's playing God. It's making its own weather. NASA's playing God. It's making its own weather. NASA's playing God. It's making its own weather.
In 1993, the FAA started warning pilots to stay away from a certain section of airspace over Alaska. The U.S. government was experimenting with a new breed of high-altitude electronic technology that was significantly altering the Alaskan airspace. The experiments continue to this day, and critics are warning that this project could have global effects that will destroy our planet.
And critics are warning that this project could have global effects that will destroy our planet.
In Alaska, the rugged, pristine wilderness is timeless, most of it remaining just as it has for thousands of years. In the midst of all this natural beauty, just outside the small town of Gakona, stands an enormous and seemingly harmless antenna farm. It is a $100 million Air Force project known as HAARP, and critics of the soon-to-be-completed facility charge it just may turn out to be the ultimate doomsday machine.
It's got all the marks of Dr. Strangelove on it.
HAARP is an acronym for High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. According to Program Manager John Hesher, HAARP is a research facility designed to study the ionosphere.
All the military have communications, surveillance, navigation systems whose paths either traverse the ionosphere or reflect from it. And so we need to be very careful about what we know about it and how we study it. What we're interested in is what is the effect of a large input of energy on the ionosphere.
The ionosphere is the outermost layer of the Earth's atmosphere. It is part of an electromagnetic field that keeps out harmful solar and cosmic radiation. One visible effect of the sun's rays hitting the ionosphere is the aurora borealis, known as the northern lights. The ionosphere also plays a vital role in worldwide radio communication.
The first transmission of radio waves across the ocean were quite a surprise when it was first done. People thought there'd be no chance to transmit signals across the ocean by wireless. And in fact, what the ionosphere does is act like a mirror. And so you transmit a signal and it bounces off the ionosphere, then it bounces off the Earth.
When HAARP is fully operational, it will transmit extremely powerful blasts of high-frequency radio waves directly up into the atmosphere, superheating the electrons that make up the ionosphere. This will cause them to disperse, effectively punching a hole in the ionosphere.
But after you turn the instrument off, this thing kind of moves around and it gets replenished. And within a few minutes, it's back to where you can't even detect that there's a hole anymore.
The Air Force says that manipulating the ionosphere and studying the effect will allow them to improve the efficiency of communications, navigation, and surveillance systems. But researchers outside the military see HAARP as a high-tech weapon with global implications.
The way I see HAARP as it is right now, it is a premier, top-notch, high-energy radio physics experiment, and has definite military applications.
Journalist Mark Farmer lives in Alaska and has written about the potential impact of HAARP for both Jane's Defense Weekly and Popular Science magazine. He believes that HAARP will be used to take giant X-rays of Earth.
Earth-penetrating tomography is a technique using extremely low-frequency radio waves. Today in geophysical probing, scientists will use explosives or a machine that thumps the ground to produce these waves, but HAARP will stimulate the auroral electrojet to make an antenna thousands of miles long that will emit these ELF waves.
Farmer's research indicates that the extremely low-frequency waves would be capable of penetrating several kilometers into the Earth, ferreting out nuclear storage facilities and other underground military installations.
This is producing surveillance systems able to detect stealthy cruise missiles and aircraft. These are systems that will enable us to communicate at higher data rates and at greater distances with our ballistic missile submarines.
While the Air Force insists HAARP is not an offensive weapon and is necessary for continuing national security, Alaska native Nick Begich proposes a different scenario in this new book.
The things that we found in other Air Force documents, one in particular was a document put together in '82. The document was called Low Intensity Conflict in Modern Technology, with a foreword by none other than Newt Gingrich. And one section spoke about using radio frequency radiation transmitters for disrupting human thinking, for basically debilitating troops invisibly by being able to bombard them with radio frequency that was tuned to just the right frequency, in just the right waveform, so as to totally disrupt their mental process and basically debilitate those troops.
That was tuned to just the right frequency, in just the right waveform, so as to totally disrupt their mental process and basically debilitate those troops.
Because of HAARP's potential to disrupt the Earth's magnetic field, many observers are concerned that it will damage the biomagnetic sensors that migratory animals like salmon and birds depend upon.
Anything that HAARP can do to the magnetic field is orders of magnitude smaller than the natural variations of the Earth's field. So I would have to say, no, there's nothing we can do to affect the salmon.
But what generates the most concern by far is HAARP's ability to tamper with and punch holes in the ionosphere.
The thing that one of the Air Force documents points out is that they want to use this heater to create enough energy in the ionosphere to get a runaway effect up to the next stabilizing level, whatever that might be.
It's precisely whatever that might be that worries Dr. Patrick Flanagan, a physicist who believes the ionosphere is extremely fragile.
The ionosphere is a chaotic system that is on the edge of instability. So the trigger point for HAARP would be that energy and that frequency which throws the ionosphere into chaos. In other words, it would be that point which throws it over the edge.
For example, it is believed that a hole in the Earth's ozone layer has caused an increase in infrared radiation, contributing to the melting of the polar ice caps and forcing New Zealand children to wear protective clothing to school. Flanagan and others believe the potential danger from a hole in the ionosphere is much greater.
It could create a change in the ionospheric shield that protects us from cosmic radiation. We're worried about the ozone layer. The ozone layer is nothing compared to what HAARP could do. You know, we're worried about ultraviolet light. That's just a very harmless ray compared to some of those energy streams or particles that are coming from outer space that are being deflected by this natural shield around the Earth. And this is what HAARP wants to play with.
Critics worry that HAARP has been placed in the hands of too few, and that international debate is necessary to fully explore all the potential dangers that this project may soon unleash, a proposal in which the Air Force has shown little interest to date.
Once we open this box, and it is a veritable Pandora's box, we're not going to be able to close it. And of course, once you acquire a technology, you want bigger and better aspects of it. And then we come into the questions of whether or not, if we go big, if we go better, if we're going to cause damage to our planet.
Proponents of HAARP insist the danger has been grossly exaggerated. The project continues to move forward as scheduled and will be fully operational by 1997.
You know, they were talking about climate change yesterday, and now we're learning that scientists and researchers are looking at how to change the weather on purpose. That's right. Lasers now could one day manipulate rain and lightning. CBS This Morning contributor Michio Kaku is a physics professor at City College of New York. Professor, nice to see you. Extraordinary seeing Al Gore and Bill Clinton there together with Charlie, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, they did not get into this discussion, though. But it is fascinating. I mean, lasers, really? To change the weather?
That's right. Well, as Mark Twain once famously said, everyone complains about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. Well, instead of doing a rain dance, we physicists are firing trillion-watt lasers into the sky to actually precipitate rain clouds and actually bring down lightning bolts. This is potentially a game changer.
But this is experimental.
It's experimental. However, in the laboratory so far, it works. When you have water vapor and you have dust particles or ice crystals, you can precipitate rain. It condenses around the seeds. These seeds can also be created by laser beams. By firing trillion-watt lasers, you rip apart the electrons, creating what are called ions, and these ions act like seeds, like dust particles, bringing down rain and even lightning.
Go ahead.
Well, this fascinates me in part because, too, I remember reading the stories that China had used this during the Olympics, that the USSR had used this after Chernobyl to create rain clouds. I mean, did those really work then? We have some of these capabilities now?
Inconclusive. Even in the 60s, the CIA used this to bring down monsoons during the Vietnam War, to wash out the Viet Cong. Governments have been playing with this thing.
Alleged to.
Alleged to, right.
Yeah.
Now, we realize that for decades now, these governments have been alleged to have experimented with weather control, but nothing conclusive. This time we're bringing in the laws of physics rather than simply waving our hands and uttering mumbo-jumbo. We're actually using trillion-watt lasers now. And in the laboratory, sure enough, they precipitate rain out of water vapor. Sure enough, you can actually bring down electricity down the beam.
So what does it mean for drought areas that need to have rain for crops? And if they don't have them, there's the consequences of famine.
Well, the bad news is if it's a clear blue sky, it's not going to do anything at all because it only takes water vapor that's already in the air and condenses it. However, for floods, for agriculture, farmers, for people planning wedding parties, football games, you name it, outdoor events and agriculture and flooding and even hurricanes, all of them could be subject to weather modification.
Incredibly interesting.
Agriculture and flooding and even hurricanes, all of them could be subject to weather modification.